Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Hope everyone is doing well. In today's episode, we'll be talking about data structures, and I've actually split the data structure episode into various episodes. Reason being there's a lot of content to cover for each data structure. So for this episode, we'll be covering vectors and lists. In the next episode, we'll be covering matrices and factors, and then the last episode will be covering on data frames, which is something that you will always use from time to time. Alright, so there are a total of 5 types of data structures. Number 1, we have vectors. Number 2, we have lists. Number 3, we have matrices. Then we have factors. And then lastly, we have data frame. So what exactly are vectors? Vectors are something that we commonly use on a daily basis. And the issue with vectors is that they can only take in one kind of data. Or should I say one kind of data type, right? So they can only take in integers, they can only take in characters only, or they can only take in logical. So you can't create a vector that is a mixture of integer and logical. It's just not possible, right? So if you want to actually do a mix, then you have to use a list, which is less restrictive, right? Also, the thing about vectors is that it's one-dimensional, right? So let's get into an example to have a clearer picture. All right, so let's start with an example. Let's create a variable called df, and then we assign this df with a vector. So to create a vector, you click on C, and then you put on the parentheses after that. So in this vector, let's put in some numerical values. So 1, 2, and 3. All right, so let's check on df itself is a numerical value as seen here. So let's put on some characters. So df1, I create another variable called df1, and then I put in some characters. So let's say I put A, B, and C, right? So you look at the df1, it is actually a character. As you can see here, it's a char. So let's create another one, another logical data type. So logical data types are actually booleans, so things like true and false and NA, right? So let's say if I do df2 and then I put in true. So for boolean, you have to capitalize every single letter. So you can't use small letter like true. You can't do that. You have to use the all capital letters for booleans. So same applies for false. So true, false, or true. So another shortcut is also you can actually use a single capital letter T to represent true and a single capital F to represent false. So you have to type out FALSE for false. You can just type in F. But for simplicity, sake, we're going to type out the full letter, right? So df2 itself is a logical value, right? As you can see, it's a logical value. So what happens if we actually mix, let's say, integer values with a character? So let's create df4. We do a mixture of 1 and a character. A. So what happened here is that the number 1 itself will be converted to a character, right? So as you can see here, number 1 itself is a character. So what happened here is that things are actually converted based on this level of data types. So firstly, the first level is logical values, then after which is integers, then after which is doubles, and then lastly we have characters. Characters, right? So what I mean by this is that here we have logical value, which is at the lower level of data type, and then we have characters, which is at highest level of data type. So what happens if we actually mix, let's say just now I mix integer with characters. Characters itself will take precedence because it's always the highest level of data type, right? So if I actually mix, like for example, logical with integer, so let me click on enter. So let's say if I do df5 and I mix it with logical, so true and an integer 1. Right. What happened here is that because integer is of a higher level, you will actually convert the logical value into an integer. So what is the integer value of true? The integer value of true is actually 1, and for false it will be 0, right? So always remember 1 is equals to true, and 0 is equal to false. So this will actually come in handy when you actually we move on to conditional statements. So instead of writing something is equals to true, you can just do something is equals to 1, right? Alright, so if you look into df5 itself, you can see true itself is converted to a numerical value. So this is what happens when we actually mix logical values with integer values. How about if we decide to mix integer values with a double value? So a double value is something that has decimals, right? It's a floating point. So let's say we do df6, done df5 already. So let's say we do 1, and then I do a 9.8 or 9.7, right? So what happened here is that 1 itself will be converted to a double. So this means that 1 itself is converted to a decimal value. So 1 in decimal will be 1.0, right? So df6, 1.0 and 9.7, as simple as that. So then next up, they compare a double value with characters. So we mix double value characters 1.1 with characters A. So that 1.1 will be converted to a character. 1.1 characters, right? So it's as simple as that. All right, so next one we're going to move on is let's say how do we actually identify an item in the variable? So let's say in a vector, for example. So df1, if you look in df1, we have A, B, and C, right? How do we actually extract out B from df1? So over here, A itself is in index 1. Always remember, for R, unlike other programming language, the index always starts with 1, not 0. So A itself is at index 1, B itself is at index 2, and then C itself is in index 3, right? So how do you extract the B from df1? So we type on df1, and then we put on these square brackets, and then we type in the index position value. So for B is 2, so we click on 2, and then we'll get B. We extract out B. All right. So now that we have the value, how do we actually delete? For example, how do we actually delete these vectors? So if you want to fully remove df1, how do we do that? We can actually assign it with a null value, right? So we assign a null value, and then now df1 is completely empty. So as you can see here, df1 is completely empty, right? So this is the kind of tips and tricks that you have to actually take note when you actually do the programming, because sometimes it can get a bit complicated, but then you can just always do the print statement to ensure that you actually get the correct variable before you actually proceed on to the later part of your code. So another question is, what if we decide to create a vector that has consecutive numbers? So let's say if I do df8, I want to create a vector that has 10 from 1 to 10, right? So 1, 2, 3, instead of typing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, instead of doing that, and also possibly putting in some mistakes when you actually do that, what you can do is you can actually use the colon symbol, right? So you can do 1, and then you do a colon, 10. If you look into df8, we have 1 to 10, right? So what if you want to try something from the negative to the positive? So let's say df9, we can do -7, for example, to 9, for example. So we can do df9, we have the value from -7 to 9. But this only works if the numbers are moving in an increment of 1, right? So let's say if you want to move it in an increment of 0.5, you want it to have a step size of 0.5. How do you actually do it? What you can do is you can use the sequence function. So seq, and then the parentheses. So over here, the sequence function takes in 3 parameters. So the first one is the start value. So let's say I want the start value to be 1, and then the end value to be 10, for example. And after that, you need to click on by. equals to, so let's say I want it to have a step size of 0.5. Right, so I type on 0.5. As you can see here, we have 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3 until 10. So the first number will represent the starting of the sequence. The second will represent the last number of the sequence, and then by itself is actually showing the increment. I want it to increase by 0.5, right? So the opposite can be done for from 10 to 1. So we can do sequence 10 to 1, then we by equals to 0.5. Okay, maybe you can try negative 0.5. Yeah, so it has to be negative 0.5. So it starts from 10 and then ends at 1, and then by we minus off 0.5. So it'll be 10, 9.5, 9, 8.5, so on and so forth. So now that we have the sequence, what we can do is we can put this sequence into the vector. So this can be done by doing CF. Let's, for example, data frame 10, we assign it, we create a vector, and then we just copy and paste this, right? Copy and paste it, click on enter, and then we look at df10. As you can see, df10 is being assigned with the sequence with a negative increment of 0.5. So now, what if we want to actually change a specific item in the variable? So for example, let's say, what do I have? I have df. Okay, look into df. Df, we have 3 values, 1, 2, and 3. What if I want to change 2 to 5, for example? So what we can do is we can do df, and then we put in the index value of 2, which is 2, right? Because it starts from 1. The index value starts from 1, 2, and 3, right? After which, we then assign this with a value of, what I say just now, 4? Let's assume it's 4. Okay, now we can look back into df. We have successfully changed 2 to 4. Yeah, right. So let's move on to list this time. Right, so what exactly is a list? A list is something that can take on multiple data types, as opposed to only one data type that we show you just now in vectors, and is also multi-dimensional, right? So for the kind of data types that a list can take in is numeric, char, logical, and also vector. We can actually add in a vector inside a list. And the fact that it's also multi-dimensional can be confusing sometimes, but it's actually useful. It's not that difficult. Maybe I can show you the example later so that you can have a better picture. Alright, so let's clear this off and let's create a list. Let's wipe this off as well. Alright, so let's create everything from scratch. So we create a variable called df, and then we assigned this df with a list. So to create a list, you just need to type on list and then the parentheses, right? So in this list, we can add in multiple values with different data types. So we have 1 and 2, which are numerical values, and then we have A and B, which are characters, and then we have true and false, which are boolean, and then lastly we add in a vector, which is 1, 2, 3. All right, so if we look into df, you can see that it's actually assigned in various dimension, right? We have a total of 7 levels here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, right? In each level, you have your own individual index. So let's say, how do I actually extract out, for example, the fifth level, right? So what I can do is, instead of typing in df5, which show us true, the correct way to do is actually df double square brackets and then put on 5. So why is this wrong and why is this correct? So let's say if we use this method df5, are we actually extracting out true value? No, we are not. We're actually just extracting out the first level. So what we have to do is we have to use a double square bracket in order to access this true value. So let's say if I do another example, let's say if I do assigned df and 5, right? As you can see here, A itself is still taking up the whole level. But then what if I use assigned df and then I choose the whole level? And then if you look into B, it's actually the full value. So as you can see here, B itself is a full value, right? A itself is still a list. That's why this is the thing that you have to remember when you actually extract out a specific value from a list, is that you have to use a double square bracket. You can't use a single square bracket as what you use in vector, right? So for, let's say for the level 7, okay, so for level 7, remember we actually assign a vector. So we assign a vector of 1, 2, and 3. What if I want to take the value 2 from this level? So I do, what's the name again? df, and then I go to level 7, and then after which I put in another square bracket here. So for this square bracket, I have to check the index number for this, right? So always remember in R, index always start with 1, right? So it starts with 1 and then 2. So I want to extract 2 from position 2. So I type on 2 from here, and then I can take out the number 2, right? So this is something that you have to take note. Once again, I have to enforce it strictly in your head that you have to use a double square bracket whenever you extract data from a list, right? All right, so now how do we actually do modification? Let's say if I want to edit level 4, and then I will take this B and convert it to a C. So similar to a vector, we have to once again use so we just now, like I said, we have to use a double square bracket. So we go to level 4, and then we just convert it to C. So similar to what we do in vector, but then for list specifically, you have to use double square brackets. So if you look into df, we have converted B to C. So same can be applied for this vector over here. Let's say I want to convert 3 to 4. I go to df, check the level, which is 7. And then I will check the index. So this is the first index, second index, third index, and then I'll convert that to 5, for example. So you look into df, we have converted 3 to 5. Alright, so now how do we actually remove component from the list? What we can do is also very similar to vector. Let's say if I want to remove number 6, I can go to df, double square bracket 6, and then I convert that to a null value. So we look into df, we can see that df itself is gone. I mean the level 6 is gone. So level 6 is a false, it's gone, and you can see that everything is being pushed up, right? So now instead of at level 7 for 1, 2, and 5, it's at level 6 because everything is being pushed upwards. Alright, so this is it for this video. In the next video, we'll be talking about matrices and also factors. I know this episode is slightly more challenging as opposed to the other episodes, but hang in there, we will get through this together. So if you have any question, you can actually leave a comment in this video, or you can actually message me on Discord and I will actually reply as soon as possible. Alright, so thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one.